So, okay, today our topic is going to be the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, the mitzvah of visiting those who are ill. Now, obviously, you could be like, what are we going to talk about today? I mean, it's kind of obvious. It's a good thing. So the idea is that in Judaism, we don't stop with just it's a good thing. We've got to legislate, right? Jews, even way before they were lawyers, we were already very much into legislation, making rules and laws. But the idea is that it's fascinating because while in so much of the world, there are things that are kind of just like good things. It's good to visit the sick. It's good to give charity. In Judaism, we really say it's not enough to just do good. What's the best good that I can do? I don't know if anybody here reads my Shabbos emails, yes. But this past week I sent out a whole email. It's a fascinating thing. There's in the world we're always chasing to make the whitest whites, right? So when you make a shirt, you want it to be like a shiny. Now, of course, there's different styles. There are times when you want to make an off-white shirt, and that's the gold. There's eggshell. There's ivory, right? There's like 50 shades of white. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of different ways that you can make white. But when you want to make the whitest whites, there's basically a product called titanium dioxide, which you need to get a hold of. And it's a natural element found in the rocks, but extracting it from the rocks is a very lengthy and chemical-intensive process, and people have been using titanium dioxide for well over 100 years to make things white. Today, they make over 10 billion pounds of titanium dioxide for sale each year, and you have it in so many of your products that you don't even know, right? So, of course, car paint has titanium dioxide when they want to make that really shiny, bright white car paint, you know, the kind that during Michigan winters looks gray speckled, right? And then there's titanium dioxide in your Oreo cookies, right? Yeah, because the inside is always, it's like almost an unnaturally white filling, right? How do they make that so white? Well, there's an answer. They actually put titanium dioxide in it to make it super white filling. But it's fascinating, the business side of titanium dioxide, the product that makes things white, is a multi-billion-dollar business a year. One company alone, DuPont, which has a spin-off just to sell titanium dioxide called Chemours, sells about close to $3 billion a year of white. And they spend about $150 million a year, $150 million a year in research and development to try to get the whitest whites and to get production up by even a little percentage. It's an amazing thing. And the whole email I sent out this week is about how the Chinese basically paid to steal the secrets of how Americans, and DuPont specifically, makes their white. It's horrific. China steals about $300 billion a year worth of American trade secrets. But we do nothing about it because China's our second biggest trade partner, and it's very hard to prosecute on stealing of trade secrets. But this happens all the time. American companies spend years and billions of dollars developing stuff. The Chinese come in and steal it. And everyone knows about it. It's like one of those things we just don't talk about. We don't talk about Uncle Harry. We don't talk about the Chinese stealing all of our development and research that we spend. But anyway, that's not really the topic of today. The point I was trying to make is that there's so many shades of white, and people want the whitest white. So when it comes to doing good deeds, it's not just like, hey, I'll visit the sick, I'll bury the dead, I'll clothe the naked, I'll do charity, I'll do kindness. Really? Well, how do you do charity? Where do you spend your charity dollars? How much research do you put in? Do you know that, for example, the American Cancer Fund is one of the worst charities out there? They only give about 1% of all the money they raise, and they raised $80 million over the last 10 years, and only 1% of it actually goes to helping families with cancer, which is what they say their stated mission is. The vast majority of the money they goes to fundraisers and their own officers and CEOs and CFOs. And there's so many amazing sounding charities that are like literally thieves. So you think you're doing a good deed, you're sending $100 to charity to the American Cancer Fund. What could be so bad about that? It could be terrible, because out of your $100 that you just sent, only $1 is going to real needs. So when it comes to charity, there's different shades of white, right? When it comes to how you give charity, there's different shades of white. If you give charity to somebody, but with a smile and a word of encouragement, that's a lot greater than when you give somebody, okay, fine, you want money? Here, take $1. Here you go. How do you think that makes that person feel? You know, yesterday, I'm actually right now in the process of trying to raise some money for a bride. this is a bride a bride and groom. They're about to get married, and they really need funds to be able to launch their hopefully happy and long-lasting married life. And so yesterday I went over to somebody to ask him. So I did it in a very respectful manner, and I didn't just come over and say, hey, I'm raising money for this, can you give me money? I said to him, me and somebody else, we would like to sit down with you for 15 minutes. When would be a good time? And he gives me this look, okay, tomorrow. And that little momentary, you may have not seen it even if you weren't looking, but this kind of, no, it wasn't that bad. It was like almost like, oh, I know what you're doing. You're trying to get money out of me. And it's almost like that moment. It's like it's insulting. It's frankly insulting, right? And it's like this is why it's hard to raise charity. This is why the Talmud says, "Greater is the one who encourages others to give charity than the one who gives charity," because it's hard and it's humiliating, right? And that's all it was. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. But there's just that little momentary laugh, like, "Oh, you need my money? Okay, no problem. I'll help you. I'll tell you when you can come tomorrow." It's so. The point is, there's different shades of white. There's different shades of good deeds. So everyone's going to agree. We can just say, okay, hey, visiting the sick, it's a good thing. We can call it a day. We can go home, have some more lunch, have some more of the delicious dessert platter. But no, that's not how Judaism does things. We're going to go to the sources. We're going to try to understand where are the sources for visiting the sick. What are the values? What are the differences? How about if I Skype in? When should I not visit the sick? Right?
When you're sick.
When you're sick, that's for sure, right? When you're sick. I used to have a little brother. I worked with an organization that worked with children with cancer. They used to match people up, big brother, little brother. I had a little brother, adorable little 7-year-old boy from a Russian family. Amazing, Oscar his name was. And when I was his big brother, he went through the process of a bone marrow transplant. And when people go through that, they really need to be in a place where they don't get any kind of virus, any kind of illness from anybody, because their immune system, they bring their immune system down to almost close to nothing because they don't want the body to reject the bone marrow transplant. So every time you walked into his room, you had to fully suit up, cap and gown and full, over your face, gloves. I mean, literally. And I'm sure you've done this before. You've worn those little things on your face, the face mask, and it gets hot and sweaty and nasty in there and like liquidy. It is, but whatever, you got to do what you got to do. That's how you visit. So definitely, if you're sick, you shouldn't visit the sick. But we're gonna discuss a little more of those details soon as we get into it. So let us dive in. Let's try to talk about some of the sources for visiting the sick in Jewish thought. The first one is actually from a Mishnah. We say this in our siddur, in our daily prayers. Before the services, there's a bunch of sort of lead-up prayers, and in them we read this from there's a Mishnah in Masechet Peah, and then there's a Talmud Yerushalmi on it, but this is what it says, and we read it in the morning prayers. These are the things that a person benefits from it in his world, and receives the main rewards in the world to come. So there are certain mitzvahs that you do, certain good deeds that you do, that, okay, you did a good deed, you'll get your reward. When is the main time for cashing in your reward? After retirement. And I don't mean when you hit 65 or 62 or 67. I mean after the retirement of this body, when you are only a soul and you are able to reap all the rewards. It's the eternal retirement. People talk about the importance of saving up for retirement, which is super important. Retirement in this world is 30 years, whatever, 20 years, 50 years, whatever it is. Retirement in the next world is eternal. It's where our soul goes forever. So, most of the good things that we do, we get sort of a reward, but most of that reward, the dividends are paid out in the next world. However, there are certain mitzvahs, and this is what's listed right here, and we actually don't have the entire, we have the entire list here. There are certain mitzvahs that you do that you get sort of like a double reward. You get dividend payout in this world, and you also keep the majority, the entire capital, for your retirement in the next world. So this is what it says. These are the things that a person benefits in this world and receives his main reward in the world to come. Honoring one's parents, okay? Acts of kindness, rising early to the study hall. So my grandfather is definitely killing it in that category. He wakes up like at 2:30 in the morning and gets to synagogue like at 3:30, and by the time the services start, which he davens the earliest services possible, they probably start around 4:30 or 5:30 sometimes. He's already said the entire book of Psalms every day. So he's definitely getting the credit for this one, arriving early to the study hall. And also, but that's both in the morning and in the evening. Welcoming of guests into your home. Okay, visiting the sick, which is what we're going to talk about today. Escorting the bride, which does not necessarily mean just walking the bride, but it means actually what I said I was raising funds for. It means enabling people to be able to get married and have their wedding, which often requires a large outlay of capital, and sometimes people need to give to charity. So specifically giving charity to a person who's going to be able to, through your charity, get married. So that's another thing. Uluvayas hames, escorting the dead, going to a funeral and giving somebody their last respects. Intensive study of prayer. Now this is a very interesting one, because it doesn't say prayer. It says intensive study of prayer, because prayer, if not studied properly, often you don't really know what you're saying, right? There's a lot of, it's a lot of Hebrew, a lot of Yehei Shemei Rabbah Mevarach. What does that mean? What is the Kaddish all about? What is the silent devotion all about? What are we praying for? What does this one mean? What does that one mean? So it's just studying prayer. Now, of course, there's studying on the base level, where you just study the English translation. And then there's studying and understanding of why these prayers are here, what the deeper meanings are, why they're in this order. For example, I highly recommend a book called Rabbi Twersky on Prayer. Rabbi Twersky is an amazing individual, a PhD in psychology, who's written extensively, and he sort of gives you this beautiful psychological understanding of prayer and the makeup of prayer. So that's another one. Bringing peace between there, and it is right here. There you go. Thank you, Alyssa. That is the Twersky on prayer, if you'd like to see what it looks like. Okay. And bringing peace between two people, and of course, and the learning of Torah is equal to all of them. So these are the mitzvahs that are unique mitzvahs that, in the sense that I get rewarded, I get double reward. I get my dividends while I'm here in this world, and then I get to the next world and reap the major capital improvements. Okay, so that's the first thing. We know that it's a good thing to visit the sick. Jerry, you had a question?
I just have a burning question.
Burning question, go ahead.
When they say the study of Torah is equal to them all, I'm sure they don't mean that if you just study Torah, it's the same as visiting the sick.
So actually, it does mean that.
It does mean that.
Now, it does not mean that anybody will be considered a complete human being if all they do is study Torah.
Okay.
Right? In the sense that the Talmud itself says that the idea of learning Torah is you should be learning to enable yourself to do. Now there's different types of learning. The very essence of learning Torah makes you a better person. Why? Because you are syncing yourself up with God. When God gave us the Torah, when God gave us the beginning of the Torah is when God gave us the Ten Commandments, and He starts with Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your Lord who took you out of Egypt. Right? That's the very first word. The sages in the Talmud would say, what does the word Anochi stand for? The word Anochi is an acronym for the following statement: Ana, which is the Aleph, I, Nafshi, my soul, Kisavis, I wrote it down, Yehavis, I'm giving it to you. So God, when giving us the Torah, literally said, here is my soul. You want my soul in written form, the soul of God? Study the Torah. So when I study the Torah, I become a more divine individual. Is that always the case? Are there people who've studied a lot of Torah who are not divine individuals? 100%. However, I can tell you this much, that the people who do, on the average, for example, people who study Torah intensively give a larger percentage of their income than anyone else. There's a lot of things that we could say on average. Does that mean that every individual? Do you know of a guy who was a very learned rabbi and he did it and he did this to you and he said that to you? 100%. I'm sure everyone here has a story or two, and maybe we could write up a couple pages of hate after our... No, I'm kidding. But the reality is that, number one, the reason... By the way, what are you guys doing right here, right now? You're studying Torah. One of the great things that you're accomplishing, besides for learning best how to visit the sick, you're also engaging yourself in in syncing yourself with God. Like before I left for this morning, I was trying to sync up my iPod with my computer. Of course, an error occurred, SO-472 or whatever it is. Thank you very much. What am I supposed to do with that? But we're not here to talk about my iPod and syncing up this morning. But what are we trying to do, though, in our very, very modern connected world? You plug your phone into the computer and into your phone, and you sync the phone and the computer, and the data starts to flow. That's what's happening right now when we study Torah. We are synced up. God's soul is in these words that we're studying, and we are literally plugging ourselves into the God machine and hitting sync for an hour. You guys are amazing, by the way. That's it. What you're doing right now. It's an amazing thing. So, number one, the very study of Torah is making you a more divine being, and one that is going to be a greater giver, be a greater lover, be a greater, take care of other people, do more charity, and all the above things. So studying of Torah itself, the act of syncing man and God, is the greatest of those things because, and of course the Talmud also talks about, the Torah study should be done what's called Torah Lilmod al Manas La'asos. Right? There's 3 levels of Torah study. There's Lilmod al Manas Lilmod. There's when I learn Torah just to know more. Then there's Lilmod al Manas La'asos, which is far greater, when I study Torah so that I should do more, like we're doing right now. I want to do the best job of Bikur Cholim, of visiting the sick. And then there's even the greatest one, which is, by the way, Lilmod al Manas Lilamed, which means learning with the intent to then teach it to others. I don't mean that you have to take these sheets out and call all your friends to your house today and say, hey guys, let me teach you a little, although you can do that if you find it interesting and you have people who want to listen. But what I am saying is that when we then, we hear something in a class and we just talk to our friends, I heard the most amazing thing today. This rabbi told me this story, this rabbi told me this teaching, I never knew this. When we start teaching and spreading the knowledge and the benefit that we have through our Torah study to others, that's the highest level. Okay. Now, so we know that Bikur Cholim is a good thing. It's one of those few select mitzvahs that we get to get benefits, dividends in this world, and the full capital improvement up there in the world to come. Now, let's see where we get this from. Who's the first person to visit the sick? And I know that you know.
I won't say it.
But you won't say it. All right, there we go. She knows, but she won't say it.
I'll let someone else.
You'll let someone else. We're actually, how about this? Let's see it inside. Let's do the words of Torah study. Okay, this comes from the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Sota, page 14a. What is the meaning of the verse, and you shall go after Hashem your God? The verse in English, Hebrew is Acharei Hashem Elokeichem Telechu. You shall go after God. Is it physically possible to go after God? Number one, God doesn't have a body, right? So it's not like, like when you jog, go follow this guy, jog behind him, right? You can do that when you're jogging behind someone who's got a physical body, or walk behind this person. Watch this person. But God doesn't really have a body to walk behind. And furthermore, at a certain point, mankind, if we try to come too close to God, so to speak, this idea, does it not already state that God is a consuming fire? We can't totally comprehend God. So how do we walk after God? And the answer is, we read about what he does, and we do it. Which is, again, what we talked about just a minute ago. Torah, where we're learning with the intent to do. So I read Genesis, I read Exodus, and I read Deuteronomy, and I read the stories of God interacting with his people, and say, I'm going to do the same thing. And here are some of the examples. Just as he clothed the naked, as he did for Adam and Eve, right? It says that God, after Adam and Eve did the sin, they realized they were naked. They made crude clothing for themselves, but God made them clothing. He said, here, you guys need more clothing. Let me give you clothing. That would be the equivalent today of giving coats to a coat drive, right? Or just somebody who's got a very limited wardrobe because they don't have the money and their clothing's starting to come apart, and you run out to Costco or TJ Maxx, which has a great clearance rack, and you just pick up a bunch of items and say, hey, I just had these things, I thought I'd drop them by, I bought them, I didn't really need them, or you can do it any way you want, but clothing the naked is one, just like God clothed the naked. Just as God visited the sick, so too you should visit the sick, as God did with Abraham, which we'll see in a moment. Now there's actually a few more examples in here that we don't have written down in our source sheet box, but the other examples are God visits the mourning. God comes to those who are mourning. God comes to Isaac when he's mourning for his father, and he blesses him. So we should go to Shiva homes and be there to comfort people who are sitting Shiva or who are mourning in any way. By the way, visiting the mourning does not stop at Shiva. Often the most difficult time for people who lost a family member is right after Shiva. Because during Shiva you have all this support, the community, everyone's there, they're bringing platters of food. There's a lot of support there. But then the Shiva house gets cleaned up and the real loneliness starts to set in. So that's often when we should really work on saying, I want to make sure to be the person who's calling on the 10th day. Make a quick blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. So God in the Torah does these acts of kindness, and God visits the sick. Therefore, one of the highest calling of mankind is what we call imitatio Dei, which in Latin means imitating the deity, imitating the divine. Our job in this world is to try to become as divine as possible. We are born very, very human, but the goal is that through our actions we should become very, very divine. Okay. That's source number 2. Now where do we see God visiting the sick? Source number 3. This is in Genesis 18:1. And the Lord appeared to him is referring to Abraham, first of our forefathers, in Elone Mamre, that's where he was located. And Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. So why does God come? Now this is a very interesting visit. Because in the entire Torah, we don't ever see an instance where God comes to somebody without a specific message. Whether it be a commandment, a prophecy. This is the only recorded time in the Torah where God seemingly just comes for a social visit. It's an amazing thing. We have lots and lots of records of God coming to various people throughout all of our holy books. But he came and told Moses this, or he told the people that, or he commanded Jacob this. But here, God just comes to be with Abraham. Why? Explains Rashi in source number 4. God came to visit the sick. Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina said that it was the 3rd day after Abraham's bris, when he circumcised himself, and the Lord came to inquire on his well-being. How are you feeling, Abraham? Not good, yeah, probably. That's well said. I actually worked in a camp where they had some Russians there, and the Russians the vast majority of Russian Jews were never given a bris, a circumcision. The Russian government very much ridiculed and mocked the practice of bris, which is fascinating, by the way, because bris, by all accounts, is the healthiest way to, for a male to go about his way. And today, there's all these discussions, these liberal groups who want to ban circumcision. I mean, the American pediatrics, there's so many studies that are done, meta-studies that were done, that say that it actually is most healthy for a human being to have a circumcision. Whether or not it's a covenantal circumcision, bringing you into the covenant of God, it's the healthiest way to go. But yet the Russians mocked it for a very, very long time, and therefore most people coming out of Russia did not have one, and this boy did not have one. And he came to camp a few days after he did his own circumcision. I mean, he didn't perform the circumcision, but he had a circumcision done on him, and he was probably 21 at the time, and it was incredibly painful. So God comes to visit Abraham, and that's the only time we see God coming for a social visit, is when God comes to visit the sick. Okay. Now, the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, discusses this mitzvah and says something very interesting that we see a lot of sources on. Amar Mar, the master said that you shall walk. It's referring to a verse that describes different things that you're supposed to do. This refers to visiting the sick. Now the question is, isn't visiting the sick included in the standard phrase, acts of kindness? Acts of kindness were already described earlier in this verse. So why do you have to make an extra category for visiting the sick? Why doesn't visiting sick just go as a subset of acts of kindness? Right? So for example, acts of kindness include clothing the naked, right? It includes helping somebody out with their kids when they're a little bit overwhelmed, but there's no verse specifically delineating those two things that I just described, but there is a verse delineating specifically Bikor Cholim, visiting the sick. So ask the Talmud, is that not part of performing acts of kindness? Why do you need to go and open up another subset? Rather, we needed to be told that even someone of the same age should visit. As the Master taught, a person of the same age as the sick person absorbs 1/60th of the illness, but he is nevertheless commanded to visit. It's a very interesting concept over here. The idea that when you come to visit somebody, you absorb a certain amount of their sickness. Now, the phrase in the Talmud is, you so to speak, take 1/60th of their illness. When you go visit a sick person, now fascinatingly from a more scientific perspective, we know for sure scientifically that people who have visitors in the hospital, for example, have better outcomes. That we know. There's a plethora of studies done on this. People who have people praying for them have better outcomes. Did you know that? Even when they don't know that people are praying for them. Isn't that amazing? You should reading up the literature on this is fascinating. But most certainly, people who have visitors do better in the hospital. Now, one could be so cynical as to say it's simply because when people have visitors, the staff at the hospital takes better care of that person because they know they're constantly seeing family and they better take tip-top care, which, by the way, could be the case in certain hospitals. But even in hospitals where people are getting the best of care, when a person gets a visitor, there's a psychological reprieve, there's a hope, there's a lot of different things, but sometimes you can absorb some of the sort of negative energy. So one might think, I don't want to do that. When I do an act of kindness, let's say I have a lot of clothing and I'm not wearing all of it, and a friend of mine, needs some clothing. I say, here, you know what? Why don't you take these ties? Why don't you take these shirts? I'd love for you to have them. I don't get hurt by that process because I wasn't wearing those shirts anyway, right? If I help my friend out, my friend's wife just had a baby, we bring dinner over, I don't get hurt by that. But when I visit the sick, there's a little bit of a risk factor over there. Seems to indicate that almost like I absorb some of the negative energies. In which case you might think I shouldn't go visit the sick. That's why it's a separate category. No, you should visit the sick anyway. Now, of course, if they're violently contagious, you should not visit the sick. And just like if you're violently contagious, you shouldn't go visit the sick. But there's some sort of concept of this, that there's like a 1/60th transference. So how we understand exactly the 1/60th, we're not going to delve into the mechanics of 1/60th and what that means exactly, but it seems to indicate that you visit a sick person while they will get marginally better, you might absorb a fraction, a small amount of negative energies, so to speak. Yes, go right ahead.
This ratio of 1/60th is very familiar on kosher laws.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a coincidence?
It is not a coincidence.
That's why I'm
Right?
asking the question.
Very good question, right? So the idea, if you guys didn't hear, is that the idea, 1/60th is a familiar measurement in all of kosher. And by the way, it's interesting you brought that up because I literally this morning I was studying the Talmud on that. I'm in the middle of studying the Tractate Chulin, which is a tractate that deals with kashrut and proper slaughter and preparation of meat, primarily. And we're in the middle of learning all those Talmudic discussions that talk about the 1/60th. So, for example, if you have a chicken soup, which is a meat dish, okay, and some milk spills into it, so we say, how much milk spilled in? If it's less than 1/60th, then it's not a problem, because the idea behind that is that less than 1/60th doesn't leave a taste behind. You would not be allowed to eat the dish if there was a taste of meat and milk together. Well, how much do I know? How do I know how much affects the taste? So 1/60th is considered to be that number. Obviously, there are certain things that are exclusions to that. For example, if you had a cholent that was 1/60th habanero pepper, or even less than 1/60th habanero pepper, you would feel it, despite the fact that it's less than 1/60th, right? But for most things, 1/60th is that number. And I think here also, part of the idea is that when you visit the sick, it leaves a flavor behind. Exactly. Okay, now, let's see source number 6. The Babylonian Talmud Nedarim 39b. It was taught visiting the sick has no limits on its performance. What does this mean it has no limits? Rav Yosef said there's no limit to its reward. But then Abaya retorted back, what do you mean there's no limits to its reward? Are there limits to the reward of any mitzvah? Mitzvahs are priceless. We even have a famous saying that we said we should be just as careful with a small mitzvah as we're careful with a big mitzvah, because we don't know in heaven which mitzvah gets the biggest payout. We don't know which mitzvah. We can do a mitzvah that we think is a small mitzvah, and in heaven it's going ding 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 ding. You know, you hit the big jackpot, right? We don't know which mitzvah is going to count in heaven for more. I could just smile at someone and say, hey, good morning, have a good day, and it might change their entire... Who knows what I'm doing for that person? So the sages tell us, just be careful with all the mitzvahs, because we think, it's a small mitzvah, it's a big mitzvah. No, you don't know which ones are big, which ones are small. So you're telling me that visiting the sick has unlimited reward? Every mitzvah theoretically has unlimited reward. So rather, Abaya said that even an older person can visit a younger one, which means that you don't only have to visit, or a younger one visiting an older one. Meaning, certain times you would say, well look, it makes sense for a younger person to visit an older person. But an older person to go around visiting younger people, it's not becoming, right? It's not. I'm already older than that person, right? They should come visit me when I'm not feeling well. No, you go visit. There's no limits to its performance. You don't age out at any point and say, okay, I'm too old to be able to go around and make other people happy by visiting the sick. Okay. Rava said that one can visit a person 100 times a day. That's a little bit. That would be involving, to say the least, right? Visiting somebody 100 times a day. Rav Acha Bar Chanina said, anyone who visits the sick takes away 1/60th of his illness. They said to him, if so, then a person should go visit someone 60 times and remove all the illness. But the answer is no, it doesn't work, because it only removes once. If you see what it says here, he replied that each time someone comes, they remove 1/60th of what remains, and provided that the visitor is the same age as the patient. So you only remove 1/60th, but then the next person removes 1/60th of what's left. It's not like you can just have 60 people lined up, everyone comes in and the illness is over, but rather each person only takes a fractional amount of what's remaining. So theoretically, if you use those, the parabola or hyperbola or whatever kind of shape it is in the scientific thing, if you did a graphing of where each person was to subsequently remove 1/60th, you'd actually never reach full revival. Yes?
Not to go off track, but so technically it could be, a friend of mine's been in the hospital for a very severe infection, and they were sent home yesterday, and they were, try to be faster, sorry. So, they sent them home, and they didn't understand why they're not, like, going to the gym and whatever, and I said very gently, you need to be patient. Home does not mean well.
Right.
Like, you have to still, I have a sense of humor, thank God, so, try to get them through, and I'm like, but, that's all. Let's say they were well physically and they could go to the gym. But mentally, they may have post-traumatic, this person might have a post-trauma to it. So when we think that there's been like all better, we don't know the percentage that's left of the residue of what is really still part of the illness.
Excellent. So that's another facet of it. You're saying even when there is a full recovery, there can be residue left behind. And by the way, that's also important because in terms of the visiting of the sick, it doesn't necessarily end when the person is just back to their physical condition. And a very strong example that is postpartum, right? Postpartum depression is a very, very real thing. There's a lot of hormonal imbalances that happen during the birth and after the birth. And a woman who could otherwise be, perfectly, calm and happy in a regular time, after their birth can suddenly be hit with a wave of sadness and depression that they don't understand, right? So visiting the sick is not only when they're physically not well, but even when they're reeling from the aftershocks or dealing with a significant depression. Okay, now, listen to this next statement, fascinating. The Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud talks in source number 7. Was there not a case with a student of Rabbi Akiva who fell ill, and no one else visited him? So Rabbi Akiva himself, mind you, Rabbi Akiva is the greatest of his generation. Rabbi Akiva is literally the preeminent Torah scholar in the generation, and he goes and visits the student, and He cleaned up for him. So not only did he go visit, he comes in, when someone's sick, they're not necessarily taking care of themselves as best they can. Rabbi Akiva comes in, the greatest sage, and he starts straightening out the room, doing the dishes. And the student says to Rabbi Akiva, "My teacher, you have revived me." He said in Hebrew, the words are Rebbe Hechisani. Chiyasani means you gave me chayim, you gave me life. Chai, life. Chiyasani, you gave me life. Now Rabbi Akiva himself, who had been the one who did the mitzvah, was shocked to hear that statement. It kind of hit a chord. He realized that what this man was saying is that you literally gave me life. I was dying in my head. And physically, when you came and showed such a high level of concern, it brought up my psychological feeling about this illness. It brought back my will to fight it. I can feel myself back on the mend now. Psychology has an incredibly powerful force and role that plays itself in people's health and well-being. People who give up are much more likely to see their demise than people who are fighting. So this man says to Rabbi Akiva, "You gave me life. I was giving up. Here I am sitting. I'm in my house. I'm all alone. I'm sick. No one's coming to visit me." And I'm almost thinking, okay, that's it. I'm going to sunset. Right here, right now. But then you came, the greatest of rabbis. You cleaned up my house. You talked to me. You made me a tea. And now I'm back. I'm coming back. You gave me life. Rabbi Akiva couldn't believe. Sometimes a lot of times we do something and we don't realize what a strong effect it has on other people. So Rabbi Akiva himself, he came out and he said, "Anyone who fails to visit the sick, it's as if he killed him." It's a very powerful statement. Anyone who fails to visit the sick is as if he kills him. We have a responsibility to our friends and family to give them life. And when we come to visit them when they're ill, we give them life. And if we abandon people when they're not well, we are literally it's almost like we are complicit in hastening their demise. When Rav Dima came, he taught that anyone who visits the sick causes him to live, and anyone who fails the sick causes him to die. What affects this outcome? Now, one of the ideas that we're going to see is that one of the great values of coming to visit the sick is when you see somebody in a deplorable condition, you're going to sincerely pray, much more so than if you just hear about it. I get emails and texts all the time about people who are sick. Right now, there's a young woman, she's 20 years old, she's in Israel. She's supposed to get married in a few weeks, and she fell ill. She was in some kind of accident at a bus station or something, and she's undergoing a lot of surgeries. There are thousands of people praying for her. I got the email, I prayed for her. I get emails all the time, just chain emails. Please pray for so-and-so. It's my friend's mother-in-law. She's in the hospital. She's going through a transplant tomorrow at 8 a.m. Please pray for her. This is her name. So I'll say a prayer right away. I'll say a prayer, a chapter of Tehillim, a chapter of Psalms. When you go to visit someone, you see them in the hospital, and you see how they're doing, you pray with a lot more urgency. I wish I could say I was on that level, that I pray with the same urgency when I get an email from somebody I don't know, I don't see. It's hard. When you see somebody, then you're going to pray for them much more seriously. So, one thing was, you said if you don't visit them, you cause them to die. Now, if I visit them, I'm going to pray on their behalf, which will hopefully cause them to live. Does that mean that if I don't visit, I'm going to pray that they die? Says the Talmud, no. Rather, someone who does not visit does not pray for him to either live or die. We don't realize we think doctors are the only people in charge of good health. And that is absolutely not true. You can be a healer. And this is the way the Talmud sees it. You may have never gone to medical school in your life, but you can be a healer through your prayers on behalf of somebody. And you're obligated to do so. And if you don't go visit them, you're not going to pray for them or pray at the same level. Now, there's another fascinating idea. First of all, if you want to see just the reward, source number 8, if someone does visit the sick, what is his reward? As it is stated, he is saved from the judgment of Gehinnom. But what is his reward in this world? Because if you remember the mission we started with, so in the next world, part of what happens is, it's an amazing thing. God runs the world measure for measure. Now, why am I saved from the judgment of Gehinnom if I visit someone who's sick? The answer is because I give that person a reprieve from their personal hell, their illness. Therefore, my reward is that I get saved from my personal hell, Gehinnom. But what is the reward in this world, continues the Talmud? Because we said that visiting the sick is one of the things that you get rewarded in this world and in the next world. So, as it says, God will guard him and grant him life and happiness in the land, and will not give him to his enemies. God will save him from the evil inclination, and give him life from suffering and happiness in the land. Everyone will take pride in him, and he will not give him to his enemies, that he will have friends like Naaman, whose tzaraat was healed, and not like Rechavam, whose kingdom was split. God will make sure you have good friends. I mean, it's an amazing thing. God will heal you, protect you, guard over you. You take care of his children, he'll take care of you. Next, another reason why it's a very powerful experience to visit the sick. There's a concept, there's a statement in the Talmud that says that God feels so, I have a daughter, and she's amazing. She's 7 years old, and she is just a bundle of joy and light and so quick to smile. I mean, it's amazing. She'll say, Daddy, can I have a granola bar when I come home, whatever, and I'll be like, yes, and she'll be like, yes! Like, she gets so excited by little things, and she's by disposition a very happy person. So quick to smile. Certain people by nature are a little bit more, taciturn. She's just by nature bubbly, happy. And I talk to her. I love spending time with her and talking. I love spending time with all my kids. But she's going through a little bit of difficulty right now with friends in school. People are picking on her. She's a very sensitive spirit, and which means that when you pick on her, she's going to react because she's very sensitive. And unfortunately in school, human nature, I'm not blaming anyone specific. Kids will be bullies, kids will be kids. But when they see somebody, when they bully them, they get worked up and they react a lot. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for the biggest reaction out of somebody. And I try to explain to her the value of ignoring it, but it tears me apart when I hear that my daughter's in pain, right? She's such a good kid, and to feel that she's just going through this pain of not being able to get friends, and she has some friends, but she's really pained by the fact that people are being mean to her, and it tears me apart. How much would I shower thanks and kindness upon somebody if there was somebody who would go there and kind of fix it for my daughter? Now, of course, nobody can fix it. This is sort of what she needs to go through as a kid. I can't send somebody in who's going to force people into her classmates, her 7-year-old classmates, to like her and be nice to her. But how much would I appreciate it? Now, God, it's the same thing. God considers us all his children. The Talmud says that when you have a headache, God says, my head's hurting me. Of course, God doesn't have a physical head, but the point is that God feels our pain. We know how much we can feel the pain of our children. My daughter is feeling emotional pain because of her lack of friends, and it literally physically pains me. God feels that way with every single one of us. So when we go and relieve one of God's children's pains, we're almost, so to speak, relieving God of his pain. So God in return will guard over us and protect us and all these things that it says in this Talmud. It's an amazing statement. Furthermore, God is there to visit the sick. There's a concept that when somebody's especially ill, there's a greater concentration of the Shekhinah at the head of the person who's not well. Let's see it inside. And he, Yaakov, said to him, Yosef, swear to me. And he swore to him, and Yosef bowed by the head of the bed. This is referring to when Yaakov was very old and he came, he wanted his son to come. He had some very specific instructions he wanted him to carry out. So it says that Yaakov bowed by the head of the bed. And Rashi, based on the Midrash, explains, source number 10, he turned himself to face the divine presence. From here, the sages learn that the divine presence rests above the head of the ill. So a value to us, by the way, when you visit the sick, it's a time also where you become closer to God. Because you're going to a place where there's like a greater concentration of godliness in the world. If you want to be selfish, which is not a bad thing necessarily in this kind of way, it's like spiritually selfish. It's not. If you visit the sick, it's also a good time for you to put in a prayer for yourself, because God's right there in a greater concentration. Of course, God is everywhere, but it means like there's a greater concentration of godliness in that place. And that's why, actually, interestingly, one of the rules of visiting the sick is that ideally one should try to sit at a level where they're below the person who's not well. So that they, so to speak, should not be sitting themselves higher than God. God is by the head of the person who's not well, so we should try to sit a little bit lower. Is that an interesting law? That's one of the laws of visiting the sick. I'm going to skip, we're running low on time. I'm going to skip a bunch of the sources. But I'll tell you some interesting rules. Look at source number 13. We'll start with this. This is from Maimonides. The laws, Hilchos Avelim, the laws of mourners, 14, 4-6. Let's go to the second paragraph there. One does not visit the sick until the third day of his illness, unless the sickness jumps on him very quickly. So, generally speaking, I mean, if someone's, God forbid, in a car accident, right, where there's like an immediate, bam, the person's in real trouble, then you go visit him right away. But if you're just sort of gradually getting sicker, you sort of give him his space, but by the third day, if he's still sick, then you go in there. One does not visit the sick in the first 3 or the last 3 hours of the day, since then the doctors are usually busy assisting the sick, which again, today, of course, they do that same thing. They round at like 3 o'clock in the morning. If you're ever in the hospital, it's like, hey, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Do you mind if we come in and draw blood and talk to you and ask you a lot of questions with 12 interns? Of course, that's what I love to do at 4 a.m. when I'm sick. Now, anyway, so the idea is that you should not be there at a time when it's going to interfere with their medical care. My wife's a nurse, right? And frequently it's a problem when the family gets in the way of their ability to care for the patient. I mean, yesterday she told me, she works in a pretty urban setting. She works at the DMC Sinai Grace, which is at basically 6 Mile and Coolidge. So, I mean, it's pretty rough and tumble neighborhoods, a lot of GSW, gunshot wounds, a lot of very, unfortunate situations. But like they have to call security all the time to remove family or friends from the room because it's interfering with their ability to care. So one of the things that we have to be very careful for is that when we visit is to not interfere with their medical care. Another thing also very important is that we need to be very, very cognizant of the person's strength. Sometimes they're very low on energy. And sometimes we may have traveled from afar to come and visit them, and we come in and they're asleep. And maybe we want to wake them up because we can only spend 15, 20 minutes here and then we have to go. And we traveled so far to see them, but maybe they really need their sleep. And maybe what we really should do is write them a nice little note and spend some time praying for them over there. And then leave. So it's important for us to be constantly gauging. And another thing actually is very interesting. The Talmud talks about this. It's actually, it's brought down in the, trying to find which sheet it is. Here, it's actually in that same paragraph. One does not visit someone who has an intestinal disease or an eye disease or a headache. I'm not sure what they're referring to with the headache. However, since or it could be like a massive migraine, since visitors are difficult for them. So, for example, if someone's going through an illness where there's a lot of, like if someone has intestinal disease, there's a lot of bodily fluids. My wife deals, unfortunately, with a lot of people who have all kinds of, contraptions in order to assist them to be able to go to the bathroom or whatever it is. So you have to also sometimes be very sensitive to the status of whether they're comfortable with people being there. Right? When you're sick, some parts of your body are uncovered. You've got cuts, or sometimes, there could be a lot of things, that disfiguring things. So you need to be very, very sensitive to that as well. Now, fascinatingly enough, again, I would highly encourage everybody to go through all these sheets. But there are some, I want to talk really quickly about. So, for example, if you visit somebody and he's totally asleep, but you pray for them, that's definitely considered visiting the sick. There's a large discussion back and forth about visiting the sick through Skype. And there's actually, it's amazing, there was a rabbi who wrote a response on this in the mid-1900s. They had no internet back then. So he calls it a telefax. If television becomes to the point where it would be like a telephone, he's trying to describe what we today have as Skype. I mean, it's amazing. But he was already talking about this in the mid-1900s. The basic idea is that sometimes actually Skype is a better way to visit the sick, especially, like we said, if their physical appearance is very, very not good. They would rather people don't see them like this, but they can just Skype and all you see is their face. That's totally good. So sometimes Skype is better. Sometimes Skype is worse. A person would sometimes it's more encouraging somebody when you come to visit them than you just Skype them on your phone. And furthermore, it's interesting, one of the sources there, I think like source 20 or 21, talks about how the first visit should try to be a physical visit. Later on, you can Skype. If you initially visit as just like Skype, there's less of a sense of intimacy. But if you started the relationship by coming out there and being there, and then you don't have the time to visit them every day by traveling all the way because the hospital's far away, once you've made that first physical initial contact, later you could Skype in. So, my friends, as we conclude today, and there's more, I hope and I encourage you can all read this entire packet. It is amazing to see the various sources on this. But let us all get the blessing that God should give us the strength, and we should be the visitors. We should be those great people and not be the ones who need to be visited. God should give us all good health, and we should use that good health to be out there visiting the sick, walking in the exact pathway of God who visited the sick, and taking care of God's headaches. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.